So the question that I'm really going to look at, would Russia be any different today if Putin had not been appointed prime minister at that time? Now, I've lectured long enough in my life to know that at the beginning of any lecture, particularly mine, people pay attention. By the middle of the lecture, well, you know, there are other things to think about. What am I going to do next? By the end of the lecture, when the hell is he going to finish so I can go about my next business? So you won't be awake to hear the answer to the question. So I'll tell you the answer to the question now, and then you can do whatever you want to do in the interim. And the answer is yes, Russia would be different, but not because of Putin. Russia would be as rich as it is, but that's besides Putin. I tell my wife, if I had been in those circumstances and had been appointed the prime minister, even I would have been able to preside over a country, largely because oil prices at that time were $10 to $12 a barrel, and now, as you know, they're $120, $125, $130 a barrel. And in a country which is the world's largest producer of petroleum, larger than Saudi Arabia, that's when you're going to benefit from that transition. Nonetheless, Putin did make some major changes, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. What did he do? Well, he understood what the problem was. And if you look at this diagram again, you can see what takes place. The light line, the light shaded line, is oil production. And you can see how oil production is dropping in this period. And without fail, by the way, you don't see this in social science normally, where without fail, when oil production drops, GDP drops. It's not the other way around. And when when oil production goes up, even a slight amount, GDP goes up. And if you factor in oil price changes, in other words, just look at total revenue. If I were to plot total revenue here for oil, it would be even a closer relationship. So it is just uncanny where you have this kind of problem and situation. So unless you can tell me that Putin is the reason for oil production recovery, then I can't give credit to Putin. And the reason for oil production recovery, as I try to argue, and I'm not the only one that's argued this way, is because oil prices rise. And unless you can tell me that Putin is responsible for the change in oil prices, again, he can't accept responsibility for that. So what explains what's going on here? The problem is, as oil prices are dropping, there's very little investment. People indeed are beginning to take their money out of Russia. The oil producers are taking their money out of Russia because to invest in Russia, invest in the sense of putting in new wells, in a country where the climate is so extreme and the working conditions so difficult, you've got to have high oil prices, otherwise it doesn't work. And so what was happening in the early period, oil prices were down. So the people who took over the oil companies at that point, or the oil resources at that point, decided to take their money out. They stripped the assets, as economists would say. They sent them to Zurich, to London, to New York, because let's buy an apartment here, or in London, or wherever you want to be, just outside the country. And as oil prices begin to rise, then it becomes, you can make more money inside Russia with oil prices rising in this kind of situation. So that's the main reason why things are beginning to change for this oil wealth that's accumulated. I said in 1998, August 17th, 1998, Russia was effectively bankrupt. There was nothing in the treasury. Today, Russia has resources in the treasury, an accumulated stabilization fund, among other things, of close to $500 billion. So you can see what the turnaround is, and it's largely this kind of phenomena. Another explanation for what is going on here is that in the early 90s, what had been the Ministry of the Petroleum Industry was broken up and privatized. And you had the new owners there, some of whom had never seen an oil field before. Mikhail Khodorkovsky, who took over Yukos, and I'll refer to him in a second in another context, describes how he went out to one of the oil fields and met the mayor and said, "Look, can you take me out one of the oil fields? I just own the company, but I've never been out on an oil field before." And so they stripped the assets. They didn't know what they were doing, and they really didn't care. They were just using this as a way to accumulate wealth and transfer it to other sources. Okay, so that's what was going on. That's why oil prices were falling, and why production was falling, and what was creating this general chaos, which really looked like Russia was in a very difficult situation.